Well, hello there. My name is HW, and thank you so much for watching Junkie TV. Today, we are going to talk about something very cool. It's how easy the Kemper makes it to set up a wet, dry, wet rig. It makes it super easy with all the doodads and diddlies that you can do in the output section of the Kemper. And it can also do all sorts of other cool things that might be really useful for studio or live environments, and we'll get into that. But let's look at the Kemper and check out the output section. Okay, so boom, I'm in the output section of the Kemper. Now check this out. To get to this section, all I have to do is hold down output, and boom, we're in here. I'm on page 1 of 9. All right, we've got the main output, the monitor output, the direct output, and the SPDIF output. SPDIF output is a digital output. This is where you can plug in and you can assign kind of whatever you want to the SPDIF output. I myself almost never use SPDIF, and so we're just going to focus on the main, the monitor, and the direct, as these use XLR and 1/4 inch, and that's probably what most people are used to. So for the main output, on the back, these are marked main output, and they can be used as either XLRs or 1/4 inches. So whichever ones you plug into, it doesn't matter. Those are still the main output. So we have a number of different options here. We have Get Processing and Get Studio. This is just your dry guitar sound, and it's used for reamping. Processing means it's using the ADA conversion of the Kemper. Studio means it's just the dry analog signal. Very useful if you want to reamp, or you want to take your guitar sound and maybe change it later with a plug-in, or reamp it to another amp or to another Kemper profile. Very useful. Stack is what's going to be known as an output tap. Instead of having the output fall here in our signal chain, we're actually going to tap right here. And we actually are going to be able to have an output that is just all, it's the entire guitar sound minus the effects section. So everything you have in A, B, C, or D in the whole stop section plus the stack section, and we're going to tap it right there. That's really useful for recording just your dry guitar. Maybe you want to add effects later, or you want to separate the dry guitar sound. And when I say dry in this case, I mean with all of the amp profile and all of these other effects, but at least you won't have the wet and dry stuff from the effects. More on how to use that a little bit later. Here, next, we're going to have mod left, mod mono, and mod stereo. Why would there be 3? Well, first of all, mod is going to mean we're going to tap the output right here after the mod block. So we're not going to have the delay and reverb block. So maybe you want to tap where you still want some modulation effects, but you don't want to get the wetness of the delay and reverb. You want to maybe save that for another output. No problem. You can do that. You can use this. Now, why are there 3? Well, like I said, there's mod left, mod mono, and mod stereo. Mod left actually uses just one side of the stereo signal coming in here. So it's going to be kind of less lush, and it's not actually summed together, but it's just going to be one side of the stereo signal. Mono is going to be both sides summed together, and stereo is, of course, going to utilize both of those outputs. For the mains, we're going to get the stereo sides, because modulation and things before it can be a stereo effect, even though we're not taking advantage of our stereo delays and reverbs. Next is going to be master left, master mono, master stereo. Same thing. It's one side not summed together, one side summed in mono, and the other side is stereo, utilizing both outputs. Then finally, our delay / reverb wet. This is really a useful control here. And if we were going to, for obvious reasons, now let's say we want to try to get a wet, dry, wet signal with the Kemper. Well, here's how we would do it. Okay, now that we understand what all the outputs do, let's talk about how to set up a wet, dry, wet. There's a couple ways you can do this, and it's a little bit different if you have a powered Kemper or a non-powered Kemper. And in that, I mean, it really determines whether you can use a real speaker cab or you have to go all powered monitors. You're gonna need probably 2 powered Kemper cabs or something else, because you're gonna need 3 speakers for a wet, dry, wet, right? So let's say that you have a powered monitor. One thing you can do, and you can do this kind of anyway, if you have a powered Kemper, jumping back to the Kemper here, we can set this monitor output to just be our stack. This is going to give us A through the end of the stack. That's going to be very useful. This is going to be our center, and it's going to be our main sort of dry guitar. With a powered Kemper, This will enable you to use the Kemper's built-in stereo, the built-in power amp, excuse me, not stereo, but the built-in power amp from a powered Kemper, no matter what type of powered Kemper that is. If it's a non-powered Kemper, you can still use the same monitor output, but you'll only need it in mono, and you can send it right out to some sort of a powered speaker. Next, for the main outputs, this will be our left and right, and we'll use delay/reverb wet. Now, you might notice, hey, how come it doesn't say mono or stereo? Delay/reverb wet is only available as stereo because it's really for this purpose. So we're going to use our main outputs, and we will plug those main outputs on the back of the Kemper into 2 other monitors. Okay, pro tip, if you are using a powered Kemper and you are using a traditional guitar speaker, you are going to want to hit the monitor cab off anytime you're using a traditional guitar speaker. If you're not using a powered Kemper, and you're not using, if you're not using a powered Kemper, or you're just using a powered Kemper, but you're not using the power amp, you're just using the monitor out on the back because you have maybe 3 powered Kemper cabs or something, that's where you're not going to need to worry about monitor cab off. You're going to want to send the cab to all 3 of them. If you are using a traditional guitar speaker, monitor cab off will eliminate the cab simulation part of the profile from the center speaker. But really the purpose of wet, dry, wet is you want to sort of keep all of the repeats and the swishy swashy stuff out of the center cone so that you get the pure guitar sound and then you get all the space around it. But I'm really, honestly, to be honest with you guys, I'm really unaware of any unit that really makes it that simple. I mean, all you have to do is come in here, plug in 3 cables to the back, run them to the units you want them, and adjust 2 knobs, and boom, you've got wet, dry, wet. Now, in addition to wet, dry, wet, there may be all sorts of studio applications for using a Kemper like this. It may become very advantageous to maybe, like we talked about, for reamping purposes, record guitar processing or guitar studio directly into a DAW and, keep the original performance of the guitar separate from the recorded sound. That way later you can reamp it, you can reassign all the effects, you can basically make it sound however you want. You really would at that point have the most control over the sound. However, another useful application, which I think is almost essential, if I were doing a record with a Kemper, having it plugged in, it's funny I say that, I've done records with the Kemper and I didn't do this, but I wasn't the producer. If I was just a guitar player. If I was the producer, I would actually definitely capture my dry guitar using that stack output, and I would record that separate from the rest of wet, dry, wet, or I would record it separate. I would definitely do that. And that way I later had the control of how much wet and dry to bring in and out. And I could always use my own wet or dry effects, or I'm sorry, wet or just delay or reverb effects later on. Not that there's anything wrong with the effects in the Kemper. It's just you may in production decide you want something more wet or less wet, and then you would have the dry sound instead of having to add more delay or more reverb on a signal that maybe already had a lot of it. Maybe you had a part where you wanted it very verby, and then later you decide there's a special type of reverb you'd rather use, or you wanted to make some adjustments, or you wanted to just put an EQ on the delays and on the reverbs. You wanted to just put modulation or some sort of a pitch effect. You really would then have control of your dry and your delay, reverb, wet sound to use with any of your plugins that you're using and whatnot. To me, that is super flexible, super useful. You may also just decide to do that at the mod block, which you can do. And of course, there's nothing stopping you from doing all 3. With those outputs and just quarter inches or XLRs, there's nothing stopping you from using the stack, guitar analog, or just guitar studio, and delay and wet. And then the producer he has all your takes, he or she has all your takes. They have it with the dry guitar that you recorded. They have it with the stack, your amp tones, and then they have all the delays and reverbs and wacky stuff that you did. So to me, that's the most useful, and it really allows you to do anything. And that's in every single Kemper. To me, that is invaluable, and you can do it with just a couple turns of a knob. Kemper wins again. For wet, dry, wet, I think it's a really cool setup, but to be honest with you, a wet, dry, wet rig is really only useful if you're like in a trio and your name's on the marquee. Like, cause that's the only way that someone's gonna put up with 3 different things. Like, nobody cares. Like, the audience can't tell you have a wet, dry, wet rig. It's for you. Gear, in that case, gear is for the player. And so it's super useful to be able to do it. But, you know, hey, why not? Well, I have been HW. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you have learned a little bit about some of the output capabilities of the Kemper. Don't forget to like, subscribe. It really supports the channel. Thanks so much, HW.